So good morning and welcome to this webinar on why Outlook can hold the key to SharePoint user adoption. My name is Matt Maunder and I'm one of the SharePoint specialists here at Automated Intelligence, and I'm going to be taking you through this 30-minute webinar around some of the challenges around SharePoint user adoption and how Outlook can be the key to help in this regard. So just to give you a brief agenda, so the first area, as I've just mentioned, is some of the implications around user adoption in SharePoint. What are the challenges around SharePoint user adoption and how can we look to combat those? And then we're going to look at why Outlook, why are Automated Intelligence considering Outlook as a mechanism to aid in user adoption? What is it about Outlook which will help in this regard? Then we're going to look at how AI specifically can help when bringing Outlook with SharePoint together. We're going to look at a demonstration and then we're going to follow up at the end. So just before we get started, I'm going to briefly touch upon who are Automated Intelligence. You may or may not have worked with us before. AI are a Microsoft Gold partner, and our key area of strength is around helping customers improve their information management strategy in their business. So we are a Microsoft Business Critical partner. So our aim and goal is very much around how we can help people use SharePoint more effectively, but how we can help organizations with their information as well. We work with a variety of clients and customers across various verticals, including local and regional and central government, other oil and gas industries and other private sector industries as well, many of whom already consume specifically some of the solutions I'm going to be talking about in today's session. So we do have a lot of experience in this space and a lot of organizations who are already reaping the benefits and rewards of utilizing our solutions. Before we get started any further though, I just want to discuss why is SharePoint adoption important? Why are we considering and leveraging this as a key reason and a topic of today's webinar? Well, the first one is around collaboration. So you're looking to deploy or have already deployed SharePoint as a collaborative platform in your business. However, what's the key reason and driver for that? One of them is likely to be how we can help users improve and how they collaborate better. It's a fact of today that if we're using old-fashioned ways of working, file shares and so forth, it's very hard to collaborate on in one single place and to centralize how our content is displayed and stored. So likely we've got duplicates and copies of content everywhere, messy file structures and so forth, and that doesn't make it easy for users to effectively collaborate together. So SharePoint is a fantastic route for doing so. Has a lot of capabilities built from the ground up so we can help people in our business, externally or internally to our organization, work together. However, that's not going to happen if users aren't adopting SharePoint. We need to ensure that they're comfortable, happy, and willing to utilize the platform so that collaboration can then improve in the business. People can't opt out of utilizing SharePoint. They need to be able to, we need everyone participating together. So improving collaboration is key, but they need to be willing to do so, and so that's why we need to ensure that user adoption is kind of at the forefront of our mind, because this then improves knowledge sharing. If we consider the fact that information is generally siloed, it's stored on people's desktops or even in people's heads, so we need to ensure that information is centrally accessible. And knowledge is centrally accessible through one place. It's not siloed, it's available and accessible and searchable through a common location. Again, SharePoint, fantastic way of doing this. There's many mechanisms for doing so, whether it's simple document management to social networking. However, again, if your users aren't adopting SharePoint, if only a few people are actually utilizing the platform, you're still going to have the same problem. So we need that uptake so that information is readily accessible through one place and it's no longer siloed. And part of the challenge as well is that people tend to be more disparate than ever before. It's much easier to have a global organization with a global reach where people are dotted all around the world even, whether it's for projects or whether it's just the makeup of the business. But that means it makes it harder for people to collaborate. If they're not in one place, in one location physically, one office, collaboration and working together can be challenging. So platforms like SharePoint can solve this problem. Global teams can work together through one common interface. But again, if users aren't using it, you're not going to get those benefits, and you're not going to break down those geographic boundaries. So it is important that, again, we look at user adoption as part of any SharePoint deployment. Then finally, how do we ensure that corporate policy and governance is enforced and followed? How do we meet our legal and corporate obligations to storing and accessing information? Traditionally, it's been very challenging. Again, if you take the old-fashioned file share as an example, it is difficult to truly enforce the right people accessing the right content in the right way and auditing that. However, with SharePoint, a lot of those challenges can disappear, and with further enhancements through AI technologies, we can really and truly enable a centralized platform to ensure information is stored and accessed in the right way, and we do meet those legal and corporate policies and obligations that we may have. But again, if users are not adopting SharePoint, then they're going to be dumping files in file shares and sending attachments in email and all the other things that open us up to risk. So again, we need to ensure that user adoption is really considered so that we can start overcoming some of these challenges. But why do SharePoint projects fail in the first place? You know, we do hear of a lot of horror stories about people deploying SharePoint or organizations deploying SharePoint, but it not being taken up, people don't like it, it doesn't work, and all the rest of it. And what are the reasons for that? Well, CMSY did a study around the top 10 reasons why SharePoint projects fail. And here are the top 10 reasons here. I'm not going to read them all out, but what we tend to see is that the majority of these reasons really do stem or come down to how users are using the product. Things like not knowing what SharePoint is, or not understanding it, not having the right technical skills, or the right requirements not being deployed, or right features not being deployed so users can use it in the way they need to. So when we look at this list, we can really start thinking about user adoption as a way of avoiding some of these reasons why projects fail. And what are some of those barriers? So here are some reasons, and this isn't a definitive list, around why users don't adopt SharePoint. Things like it's simply new, it's unfamiliar, they don't understand it. So, you know, with that, how do we why should they use it? And they're going to go, well, it's new, I don't understand how it works, so, you know, they're going to use the ways and mechanisms that they already know. And other things like just not being able to find their information, that's a huge sense of huge frustration for users. If their information or content has been migrated into SharePoint from other locations, all well and good, we can consolidate it, but they can't find their information, they're going to get frustrated. When they eventually find it, they're going to copy it to a local desktop or what have you. We need to avoid those kinds of things. And sometimes being perceived as being more complex. You know, it's a different way of working. It's adding complexity. I've got to do more things potentially, which do benefit the user and the business, but the perception is complexity, and they don't like that, of course. They want to consider the old ways of working. And let's face it, there are always going to be those people that just don't like change and like it better the old way. Again, we need to avoid those kinds of things, because SharePoint can be a huge change in company culture, so we need to make sure we consider that from a user perspective. But what's this got to do with Outlook? Well, Outlook is a familiar tool. It's majority of users already use it. Whether they love it or hate it, it's a culturally accepted product. So why not use something that users already know how to use, are trained in and understand? Let's leverage that familiarity. And Outlook is designed for offline and online use. We're all familiar with being able to go offline and work within Outlook on our content. When we go back online again, everything is synchronized and updated. So let's leverage that common way of working in Outlook and bring it into the world of SharePoint. And let's face it, email and content should live together. We spoke to one customer who said that around 70% of their content lives in email. We want to kind of change those proportions a little bit. SharePoint is really the right place to store a majority of content in most cases. So how can we bridge that gap between SharePoint and Outlook so that email and content can live in one single place and be managed together? I mean, Outlook is familiar, it's easy to navigate, people know where things live and where things are, and it's one environment, it's one place to do all of our work. SharePoint is never going to replace Outlook, let's face it. So how can we bring the amount of things that people have to use on a daily basis down a little bit? And finally, the fact of the matter is, SharePoint's already, and Outlook is already deployed. It's on most people's desktops already. So why not use the software that's already out there rather than having to deploy huge amounts of complex consoles and other tools to make this problem go away, or to help the area of user adoption. So with that being said, I'm going to jump out of my presentation now, and I'm going to launch into the demonstration. So first of all, I'm just going to bring up Outlook. You'll see that I'm using Outlook 2013. However, the solutions I'm going to be talking about today are compatible with previous versions of SharePoint. So you'll see the only difference really is this little extra folder here, AI Sync Point, which looks rather innocuous now. It's going to become clearer as I go through the demonstration. But by and large, vanilla flavor version of Outlook here. And then if I jump into SharePoint, I have a standard SharePoint site here with a document library which I'm going to utilize for today's demonstration, with a number of documents and a number of folders within them. Some of the folders have content in. Folders like investments are actually empty at this stage. So what I'm going to do, go back into Outlook. In fact, now I'm going to go into SharePoint, and the first thing I want to do is actually synchronize this folder here with Outlook. And it's a simple case of pressing the Connect to Outlook button. I click Allow, and in Outlook I confirm that this is what I want to do. And what you'll see is this is where AI Sync Point starts to work. This is the product we're talking about today. AI Sync Point will begin synchronizing all of the content in that library down into Outlook. So what does that actually mean? All of the content is now that was in that library is now accessible through SharePoint, through the SharePoint console. And it's also accessible offline because it's been synchronized with my local machine. So that now not only can I access SharePoint content, but I can edit it, save it, work with it, and ultimately when I'm in an offline or online state, I can synchronize back up with SharePoint again. So let me give you a few examples of that in a moment. So that's what's happened initially. So you can see that our documents and folders are now accessible, and we can see all of the content through the Outlook interface. Now that I've performed that process, I no longer have to go into SharePoint itself. But not only, like I say, can I do that, I can go into any document, I can view and edit that content. And this doesn't matter whether I'm online or offline now. Because I'm leveraging Outlook, I can actually go in, I can make changes to the documents, I can save the document back into Outlook, and I can reshare that with SharePoint when I go back online again. So full read and edit capabilities via the Outlook console. So really, really powerful capabilities, so that it really does enable the user to effectively not have to go into SharePoint itself via the web interface, but access their content all available here. So this is the first step to helping users access content. Rather than having to go through SharePoint, we now have a familiar interface to work with and access that content. So very, very powerful here. But not only are we editing and utilizing documents, but we can actually take content and drag it into SharePoint as well with a simple drag and drop exercise. So I can take a bunch of emails and I can I'll drag it into that investments folder I showed you a moment ago, which was previously empty. So what I'm doing now is I'm making content in email accessible in SharePoint. Not only can I do that with emails, but I can do that with attachments. I can even go onto my desktop and take files and drag them in as well. So I have a quick and easy interface to take content which was once siloed on my machine and make that content accessible in SharePoint as well. So I can go into my investments page, and now you can see that all that content is available, editable, just like any other documents I was showing you previously. So really, really powerful. Now I've manually dragged and dropped that information in, but I can automate this process as well. I can use a simple mechanisms that already exist in Outlook, like the Outlook rules. So I can create local Outlook rules to say when email meets a certain criteria, automatically put it into a sync point folder. So I don't have to necessarily perform that drag and drop myself. That can be automated. So the user doesn't have to do anything necessarily. It's kind of up to you how you deploy it, and we can work with you on that. But you do get the benefit of a multiple way of making this work. So what we've shown so far is that we've synchronized content with Outlook. We've made it accessible so that it's available online or offline. We're making SharePoint, Outlook an interface into SharePoint, bridging that gap between the user and SharePoint via Outlook. And we've shown the ability to take content which exists today and make it accessible from the desktop, from email, into Outlook itself. So now I've made some of those changes. I'm going to go back into SharePoint and I'll go into that investments page, and you'll see the content has now been synchronized and it's accessible, ready for me to work with. So not only now as the content in SharePoint, but of course I can search on it in SharePoint. If I go into the properties of an email, for example, you'll see that all the header information has been captured, to, from, date sent, date received, and so forth. So that means that the email which once again was siloed, now the powerful SharePoint search can be utilized against that content, as well as any other documents. And what you'll also see is that any documents that I've synchronized now has metadata automatically applied, and that's leveraging another AI solution which installs into SharePoint. But what I'm ultimately showing you here is that now other SharePoint features or third-party features can now be used with that content. So in this case, automatic metadata inheritance, which, like I say, is another capability of automated intelligence. Then going back to my home page, what I'll also show you is, of course, that seamless nature in which this works. So on refreshing the page, you'll see the document I edited via Outlook is now synchronized with SharePoint because I'm online. So you can see that that was edited 3 minutes ago. And of course, I can go in and I can view the properties and see that information. But if I actually show you the version history, you'll see, of course, versioning and all other SharePoint capabilities are now working. As you can see here, the new version has been created for that edit I made. And of course, I can go in as well, and I can access the document and I'll obviously see the changes I changed from quarter 1 to quarter 2, and there's the change I made right there. So this is a seamless way of working. It just works in a way that users like. So this really does mean that users then start thinking, well, this is easy. I know how to use Outlook. I know how it works. Okay, there's a couple of extra things I can do to bring it into SharePoint, but it really does mean that we can start looking at how we can increase user adoption here. And there are other things we can do as well within Outlook to not only make things easier for the user, but ensure the business is protected as well. So for example, if I then want to make these, share these these documents with other people, typically what I do is I save them or I drag them to my desktop. I will then send them as an attachment, which is going to be harmful to my infrastructure because we've got to send huge attachments across the network. But of course, if I'm taking content out of SharePoint, SharePoint no longer manages the content. The permissions no longer apply and so forth. So how do I overcome some of those challenges? Well, if I highlight a couple of these documents and right-click, you'll see that there's another new option which is provided through SyncPoint, known as Sender's Link. As you can see, what that does is it creates a friendly URL so that if I want to send that document to somebody else, I'm not sending the whole file and clogging up my network. I'm sending a simple link, which is obviously much smaller. But the other benefit is if I accidentally send it to the wrong person, all that person is going to get is a link. And of course, if they don't have the right permissions in SharePoint, they're not going to be able to access that document at all. So it preserves the security of that document as well as being more respectful for the infrastructure, as you can see here. And that's a real benefit of SyncPoint in general as well. In terms of the infrastructure, SyncPoint, all the synchronization events that occur are asynchronous. So respectful to the network and to the client as well. Rather than synchronizing huge globs of information in one go, we'll trickle those changes up and down. We can manage when those changes occur so that we can ensure that we're respectful to the network and we're not going to crash the client with huge amounts of content and software being deployed down. So this is another really key point here. So I'm showing you a number of things, and what I've shown you at the moment is around how we can synchronize content. And I showed you the process of clicking the Connect to Outlook, which is very simple. But how do we take that a step further and automate that to another degree? So if I go back into SharePoint now, what I'm going to show you is how we can automate the process of synchronizing folders so that users don't have to worry about even connecting to Outlook. So if I create a new site in SharePoint, and this is using an AI site creation mechanism, although there are various ways in which we can automate this process using what we call subscriptions, but this is just one mechanism we can show. So if I create a new AI site with some keywords and project ID and various other elements, and I select some additional metadata for the creation of this site. What I'm then going to do is select the types of document that I want to be available in this site. So in this case, tax returns and merger documents, and I'll click Next. So then once that site is going to be created, in this case we're going to apply policy, what this is going to do in the background is not only is it going to create the site, it's actually going to automatically synchronize those folders with Outlook. So again, really powerful feature so that users don't actually have to worry about going into Outlook and creating their new site themselves and synchronizing their content themselves. That will automatically be done for them. So you can see the libraries have now been created in my new site. If I open up Outlook, you'll see those folders will be synchronized. And this is what some of the things we're doing with a lot of our customers, because we have, for example, a council who have social workers who will go out every day in the morning and need access to documents for the cases they're working on that day. So what happens is they open up Outlook in the morning and all that content is automatically synchronized down. The right folders are automatically applied to their user profile and they'll see that content. So you can see in this case those folders have now been applied and have automatically synchronized with SharePoint from the site I've just created. So, there are a number of ways we can automatically synchronize content between the user and SharePoint. In some cases, we can do that without any user interaction whatsoever. So what I'll show you today is how we can make content accessible between SharePoint and Outlook, how we can ensure that it makes things easier, it bridges that gap between the user and SharePoint, and the user can ultimately work in Outlook using the same things that Outlook, mechanisms that Outlook already has today, whether it's the Outlook search, rules, alerts, editing, and of course other things like forwarding and all the rest of it. So I can even open up an email that's been synchronized and still use the standard features in Outlook. So nothing changes for the user apart from an enhancement to the way they work, as well as that synchronization into SharePoint. So hopefully what you've seen there is how we can ultimately bridge that gap between the two products. So just to summarize then, what we're showing you is how SharePoint can overcome some of those barriers to user adoption, remove the barriers so that suddenly Outlook is familiar and people work in the way that they like to work today, reduce that complexity, introduce offline working, and ultimately people can find their information. And this is how AI can help. SyncPoint can vastly increase user adoption, leveraging SharePoint features, control and find information, and provide that familiar window into SharePoint through a very simple, tiny little bit of software deployed into Outlook, which is really lightly deployed on the estate. So this means we can overcome some of the out-of-the-box limitations that SharePoint has, and then because we're using SharePoint, we can leverage all of the other benefits of SharePoint to improve governance, compliance, collaboration, knowledge sharing, and so forth. So with that being said, I'd like to thank you very much for your time today and listening to this webinar. If you'd like to find out more information about what we've discussed today, or you'd like to have a one-to-one conversation to understand more about how we can help you, then please do have a look at automatedintelligence.com and follow our Twitter feeds as well so you can get the latest information. So with that, thank you very much for your time, and I wish you a pleasant rest of your day. Thank you.